I have always dreamed of scaping a shallow aquarium. And today, with this build right here, that dream comes true. Welcome back to Logan Rando Aquascaping. My name is Logan, and today I've got a full setup tutorial all the way from the hardscaping to the planting to the flooding of the tank for this bad boy right here. This is a UNS 5S. It's a 2-gallon aquarium, and I'm really excited to be setting this up today. So before we get started, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Helps me out big time. Now let's dive in. So let's talk a little bit about the equipment. The UNS 5S is a beautiful tank from Ultimate Nature Systems, and it's got that really cool wide aspect ratio, which is something I really like to work with. Additionally, as with all glassware from Ultimate Nature Systems, you've got the beautiful mitered edges, as well as ultra clear glass for an uninterrupted view into your aquarium. For the lighting, I knew I had to go with suspended lighting, because with the tank this shallow, I knew I wanted to have big hardscape, and I couldn't have a light being in the way. So I'm using the UNS hanging bars, which are beautiful stainless steel. I've got them on almost all my scapes in my little studio. And for the first time, I'm using a Chihiros light, Boost Plant, who supported me for this video. Huge thanks to them. They provided me with this light, and they've got the entire Chihiros line of lighting on their website now. So if you're interested in any of the technology and equipment, as well as the plants I'm using, go ahead and check the link in my video description. This is the Chihiros RGB Mini, and this is a powerhouse of a light. It's fully customizable with the app, and I've actually got the intensity down to 18%. That's how powerful this light is. Now let's get to the good part. Let's start hardscaping this aquarium. I'm working with some beautifully locally collected wood that I'm calling desert wood. And in order to provide really nice color and textural contrast, as well as stabilize the wood visually and structurally, I'm using a collection of Ceru stone that I've collected over the last few years. I started collecting this stone back when I was living in upstate New York, and I would just get one piece at a shop, get another piece, moved it all the way across the country down to the West Coast, to Portland, Oregon, and now here I am in San Diego, California, using it once again. So just goes to show you, if you've got a good hardscape collection, you can have it for life and reuse it with proper maintenance. So the process of hardscaping this build was really complex, and it was pretty difficult to film. It was a lot of putting stuff in the tank, taking it out, knocking stuff over, spending a lot of time getting things to stand on itself. So here's what I came up with after hours and hours of experimentation. I'm using the UNS Controsand Bora all around to provide some more contrast. And then for additional detailing and helping to establish that sense of scale, I've recently taken a liking to adding a UNS Controsand Santa Fe, which is a really fine gravel that I think works really well with this. Now later on, as I was conceptualizing the planting in my head, which can often take me weeks, I let this hardscape really sit for about a month and a half. As I was conceptualizing things, I decided, you know what, this is gonna look really, really good with a background aquarium plant, especially because I'm not using any sort of a cosmetic background. So I really want the plants to serve as the background. So I decided to siphon out the sand in the back. And then what I did was I added some UNS Controsoil. I had some extra brown variety lying around. And I chose this because I figured if it rolled to the front a little bit, it would kind of mix better with the color scheme of the sand and the gravel. So I added a generous amount of that to the back because I knew I wanted to plant back there. The hardscaping process for me can be really, really arduous. It's a lot of trial and error. It's a lot of thinking things are gonna not work out, and then when it does, just kind of breathing that sigh of relief. But for me, the planting is kind of the victory lap. It's adding color when you've already sketched out the outline. So I'm fortunate to be working with a beautiful variety of Bucephalandra that Boost Plant sent over. This is the Boost Lamandau Purple, as well as the Boost Ketagang Round Mini, and these are really fine species of Bucephalandra. With a tank this tiny with such detail, you don't want to spoil it by adding a giant leaf. That's going to kill your sense of scale. So it was really important for me to pick Boost species that were really tiny. But first, we're going to plant the background, and I'm working with a plant that I've never worked with before. This is the beautiful Blixa japonica, and while the plant species I ordered came in quite tall and mature, it can be trimmed and pruned to maintain a sort of tight, compact look. And that's ultimately what I'll do once the plants are rooted and established. But for now, we're going to be planting them just like this in their current form to minimize any sort of transitioning they have to do. So this was somewhat of a difficult process because with all of the wood kind of coming out of the tank, you really got to be careful where you put your hands or you'll start breaking twigs. So what I did was I kind of delicately placed the plant as deep as I could. And then what I would do is I would use my my other hand to kind of anchor it as I pulled out my forceps. And once I had the entire background planted with the Blixa japonica, I took a step back and I was really happy to see that most of the background was visually colored. But over the next few weeks, the plant will kind of grow and spread out, and we'll get some really nice coverage, and we can prune it accordingly for a really tight look. And eventually, with good high PAR, and by PAR, I mean photosynthetically active radiation, that's essentially the frequency of lighting that your light puts out that plants will use. With a high PAR light, this plant will express some beautiful red coloration. So I look forward to seeing how it develops over the next few weeks. Now it's time for the fun part, adding the epiphytes, which is always a cool experience. I don't always necessarily have a rhyme or reason when I'm adding epiphytes. I kind of have to take it one plant at a time. Now, depending on the scape, you can wedge the specimens between pieces of rock and they'll hopefully stay, but I like that extra security that super glue adds, mostly because in a tank's first few weeks, I'm doing a lot of scrubbing as we get through that diatom and kind of biofilm phase, so I don't want to be dislodging any loose plants. So I'm using a cyanoacrylate-based super glue. I recommend the gel type when you're gluing epiphytes, but liquid type gets the job done as well. And I'm really trying to soften any spots that kind of look unnatural with the placement. And I'm also trying to place things in a way that look like they would grow naturally. Bucephalandra comes from Borneo, and it's a bog plant. It grows on the sides of waterbeds and kind of transitions little watery areas into immersed setups. So I'm going for that look. And after taking a step back, I was happy to say that I think I achieved it really well. So super excited to see the plants develop. Now let's talk a little bit about the CO2 infiltration system I'm using. Now, I have to admit, I am totally an external canister filter type of guy, but with a tank of this size, there are some challenges with using an external canister filter. Number one, because the tank is on this IKEA shelf and it's positioned in a way that I think looks really good in my space, I don't have it on the edge, which kind of makes adding lily pipes difficult because you have to bend the tubing in a weird way that isn't really conducive for a tight fit. And then number two, finding pipes that are small enough to fit in this little tank is also extra challenging. So Boost Plant was kind enough to provide me with their very smallest hang-on back, aka HOB filter, and this is called the Mighty Aquarium filter. And I'm using the extra small variety. It comes with the tube intake extender, but I have that off, and then I have the intake with a little sponge to catch any sort of debris. And I'm happy to say that this little filter is completely quiet. You don't hear it whatsoever, and it's actually quite powerful. I've had to reduce the strength a little bit, which thankfully you can easily do on this little adjustable knob up top. Does it beat an external canister filter? Never. You know, the more you can minimize equipment, I think the better. But like I said, there are challenges with that with this aquarium, but you never know. Maybe in the distant future, I'll swap this out for one of the new UNS Blitz systems or something like that. As for the filter media, I'm using the two sponges that came with the HOB filter. Of course, you could swap this out for something else if you wanted. And I added my own biomedia. I'm using the AQUARIO Neo Media Pure, and they're dense enough where they'll sink down and they won't float up, unlike some of the more porous competitors, so I appreciate that. And because the biomedia is not seeded and it's brand new, I want to build up some beneficial bacteria. So we're going to jumpstart things by using some of the AQUARIO Neo Bacter. They come in these little pills that you pop open and then put into the tank, and you're supposed to dose them daily, you know, for the first week or so. And I've had good anecdotal results with them, but you know, you don't necessarily have to do this. Eventually bacteria will build up naturally, but I like to give myself as many advantages as possible. So as far as the CO2, nothing too crazy here, just my usual pressurized setup. Because this tank is so small, I'm using a paintball canister, one of the really cool white ones that Ultim Nature System makes, and I'm diffusing that through a tiny little AQUARIO diffuser that I actually modified. I didn't have one that was short enough for this aquarium, so I just kind of cut it with a little bit of a tube cutter that I had, and then attached it to some CO2 proof tubing, connected it to a little glass U-hook, and it worked out perfectly. So I've got a drop checker as well, so I can monitor the CO2 levels over the next few weeks. Basically, by the time your light turns on, you want that drop checker to be lime green, and then you want it to be lime green throughout the entire CO2 process. If it starts dipping towards yellow, you know you probably running too much CO2 and you want to take the bubbles per second back a little bit. Common mistake I see people making is living and dying by bubbles per second. BPS is going to vary so much depending on the filtration you're using, the size of the tank, the pressurized system itself. So, start at 1 BPS, but really let the drop checker, kind of guide exactly what you're doing. So there you guys have it. This tank was months and months in the making. It was doing one step at a time, taking a few weeks off, kind of thinking and conceptualizing. And I gotta be honest, it made the whole process, really enjoyable. And it just had such a nice element to my aquascaping studio. So I'm thrilled to see it develop, but I've got the most important question for you guys. I need some help. How would you stock this aquarium? Obviously, we're not gonna be putting any big fish in here, right? It's about as small as it gets. But if you were gonna add fish, are there tiny enough fish that you think would look cool in here that wouldn't totally kill the scale of the tank? And I gotta add shrimp to this tank. It's just begging for it. But I've already got 2 varieties of the classic Neo Caradinas in my studio space. So I'm actually thinking about switching it up and going with a really cool kind of high-end Caradina species. I converted my studio to RO so I can make any water parameters necessary. So let me know down below in the comments what fish you would add and what you think a really cool Caradina would be in this aquarium. Thank you so much for watching. If you like these tutorials and these builds and my content in general, taking a second to like the video and more importantly subscribing, it makes a world of a difference. This has been Logan with Logan Rando Aquascaping, and I'll catch you guys and gals next time.